Okay, super. That's great. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll jump right in because we've lost a moment or two there with our technical glitches. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We have the team from Technical Safety BC today. We're going to be talking specifically about electrical systems because when everybody got into the meat and potatoes of giving everybody some real sense, it occurred to everyone there was so much information, there was no way we could cover it in a typical webinar. So we're going to plan to do a separate session on elevators and other components and buildings, but electrical systems are the really top issue right now that we're going through. I don't need to go through much. Harpreet, if you just want to go to the next slide, it's just a big note of thanks to Proline Property Management in Victoria on Vancouver Island for being our sponsor this week. We appreciate their support and certainly the service to our members. And one more slide, Harpreet, and then we'll just a little privacy reminder to everyone that this is a recorded session. We post these sessions to our YouTube channel, so you can come back and look at them later. If you have additional questions, please, by any means, feel free to email our office. We can forward emails to Tech Safety BC. We can do that as well. When this presentation is over, you're going to get an emailed copy of the presentation as well as a bunch of links and a request to participate in the survey for Technical Safety BC. So please participate, take a few moments to do that because they just are looking for any kind of feedback at all. So Sween, I'll let you go over to introductions to your team and I'll just let you guys go for it. And then when we're at the very end, we'll stop and answer any questions, and hopefully we have a little time left.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Antonio. I'll start. Safety is a shared responsibility, and we at Technical Safety BC are really committed to educating and empowering British Columbians to keep the safety system working. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sween Gilotra, product leader at Technical Safety BC, working on electrical operating permits. And I just wanted to take a moment to mention that we are currently working and on a journey to improve our electrical operating permits, to redefine the value associated with it, and to also reduce any friction that's currently there in the system while you pull an electrical operating permit with us, right? So as Antonio mentioned, we are on this journey and we really would like to see and hear from you. And that's where you'll be also receiving an email, as Antonio mentioned. And please do take the time to share the feedback and any inputs, and we will definitely look through them and incorporate them on the improvements as we do them. Today, I have with me two of our very experienced and passionate electrical safety officers, Richard Belitsky, who's been focusing on the Lower Mainland North region, north of the Fraser River. He has a total experience of about 46 years and has been with the organization since 1998. Then I have with me Neil Banman, who's focused on the Greater Victoria area. Neil has a total experience of 30 years of the electrical industry and has been working with Technical Safety BC for the past decade. Without much ado, over to you, Neil.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Sween. I'd be remiss to not mention that we do have a gentleman who does this project in the Okanagan as well. His name is Ray Haas, and Ray is lucky enough to be in Mexico today, so will not be joining us. But for those of you out there that will be in the Okanagan area, I'm sure you'll be dealing with Ray. I like to structure these talks very much like a W5 session, very much the who, what, when, where, why. So hopefully between Richard and I, we'll be able to get you there today. So who is TSBC? Well, TSBC is the organization that oversees the safe installation and operation of technical systems across the province. We do this by issuing permits, licenses, certifications. We work with industry to reduce safety risks through assessments, education and outreach, enforcement and research. So again, this is all about public safety. The goal today is education of building owners and strata managers. We're going to talk about electrical safety programs. We're going to talk a lot about qualified individuals. So Key points that we'd like to discuss today are the owner's responsibilities, field safety representatives' responsibilities, and permit requirements for apartments and stratas. Some of the products and services that we use to achieve, say, electrical safety in the province are, of course, installation permits, the operating permits we're going to be talking about today, and education just like this. And quite frankly, education has always been our choice for our first step. Our jurisdiction. I'm not going to get too bogged down in our jurisdiction, but there are a few areas of the province where city inspectors actually have jurisdiction. So for instance, here in the Victoria area, the city of Victoria proper has 2 electrical safety officers. I generally surround them in the areas of Saanich, Oak Bay, and Esquimalt. If you ever have a question about whose jurisdiction you're in, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll make sure we get you in contact with the person who has jurisdiction in your area. So don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with a lot of statistics. And I know none of us want to do death by PowerPoint today. But the reason we wanted this slide up was that we wanted to really highlight the point that when we do physical inspections on stratas, and particularly the older buildings, we're finding a performed fail rate of about 33%. So 1 in every 3 that we go to, we're finding hazards. Now, some of the other statistics here regarding whether these are minor hazards or high hazards. But this is definitely the reason for electrical operating permits in the first place. It's really about a collaboration between the asset owners, field safety representatives, and us here at TSBC to ensure that safe work conditions are there for all people involved, safe conditions for the public, and we want the stratas to be able to demonstrate their due diligence, not just to technical safety, but also to the people from OH&S and WorkSafe. So what is an electrical operating permit? As I mentioned, this is really a relationship, and it's between you, the strata, us here at TSBC, and perhaps more importantly, the field safety representatives of an electrical contractor. This is really all about ensuring that an operating permit will ensure that owners have direct access to qualified field safety representatives. And they will provide guidance and assistance for the development of a continuous electrical safety and maintenance plan. So what kind of equipment requires an electrical operating permit? This is probably the most common question that we receive. There's a little bit of legislation that people will often read, and it really focuses on that 250 kVA of the power supply, over 750 volts, etc. But what we're seeing for the buildings we're talking about today is particularly any building that has a fire alarm system and any building that has an elevator in it, as well as a lot of other safety systems that we'll give some examples of here next. There you go. So as I mentioned, elevators, fire alarm systems. Not a lot of people are aware that the fire alarm system controls a lot of things other than just the bells. It also has control over your elevator, returning it to the ground floor in the event of a fire. But it also importantly controls a lot of the HVAC systems. So it's going to close off a lot of the venting to prevent fires from spreading in that manner. One of the others is that magnetic door holders are a common item out there that not a lot of people are aware of. The fire alarm system will actually shut these doors automatically. Again, all about preventing fire. So really what we're looking for here is that we have a formal relationship between you and your electrical contractor to make sure that qualified individuals are looking after these systems so they can be depended on in the case of an emergency. So when is an operating permit required? Perhaps the second most common one. When all of the conditions are present that we just mentioned. I primarily reach out to buildings when I find an elevator permit, and then I'm primarily going out and visiting the sites to ensure that they've got the safety systems in place. And that's when we say, okay, there's definitely an operating permit required, and that's when I'm reaching out either to the strata managers, typically property management companies like Proline, or to the strata themselves if it's a self-managed strata. So operating permit responsibilities. The building owner is responsible for the electrical operating permit. So this means that ultimately the permit belongs to the strata. Quite often these are managed by the strata management company. Just like your elevating permits, they'll quite often take care of the invoicing, they'll take care of all these things. The operating permit responsibility for that property owner is really about having a safety system in place, having documentation of that, safety system and ensuring that they've got this relationship in place with an electrical contractor that has a field safety representative. So with those owners' responsibilities, they do also have to comply with the terms and conditions on the permit and maintain that log. And importantly, ensure electrical work is being performed by persons who are authorized under the Act. This is a very important point. And one of the things that will really help you with that is your FSR. He's an expert in the Act and regulation. I often like to call them compliance and maintenance consultants. I think that's a good term for them. So if you're ever curious whether a worker is authorized to do that work, just reach out to your FSR and they'll be able to clarify this key point for you. As well, there is a requirement under the Act and regulations to report incidents. Now let's knock on wood and pray that that never happens in your building, but should it, there is a requirement to reach out to the technical safety, electrical safety officer in your area so that these can be investigated. So what is a field safety representative? This is an electrician who's taken extra training beyond just being a journeyman electrician. Not all electricians are field safety representatives, but every electrical contractor in the province does have at least one FSR, if not more. They are named on your electrical operating permit. As I said, I like to consider them like a consultant. This is someone that you can go to do the work. This is also someone you can go to clarify and get information. They are experts in the Act and regulations, and they deal with people like Richard and myself every day. And they're going to be a very good person to reach out to make sure that your building is in full compliance. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Richard, and he'll take you the rest of the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be part of this event, and I'm glad everyone is attending here to hear what we have to present to you all. I am passionate about this topic and really care for helping people in this field of work about operating permits. So to begin with, I want to illustrate the significance of following technical safety regulations. So let me first start with the analogy of driving a new vehicle purchased off a dealership lot. Just like we need to perform certain tasks before taking a newly purchased vehicle on the road, we also need to adhere to safety regulations and guidelines when working with technical equipment or regulated products. Just as we must have the appropriate auto insurance, license plates on the vehicle, and a valid driver's license before driving a newly purchased vehicle on the road, we must also ensure we have to have the proper operating permits and written permissions, a qualified person to guide us, like Neil said, an FSR that Neil described, and the necessary training and knowledge to work safely and in compliance with the regulations. FSR, or Field Safety Representative, is a qualified person who has the necessary training and knowledge to ensure that technical equipment or regulated products are used safely and in accordance with the regulations. The FSRs play a critical role in ensuring workplace safety and must be consulted before having regulated work done or working with technical equipment or regulated products. Before I share this, it's a tragic story. I want to reiterate that we must take preventative measures to avoid similar incidents in the future and approach this sensitive subject matter that I'm about to discuss with you. Take it with empathy and respect for the victim and their family. So please change the slide. So here it is. In June 2022, a tragic incident occurred at a nursery in BC that could have been prevented. The nursery provided lunchrooms for its employees equipped with microwave ovens, as this microwave is pictured here in this photo. Next slide. However, one of the microwaves malfunctioned and a maintenance worker took it out to the workshop and attempted to repair it while the worker was without proper authorization, no permission, and no qualifications to do the work. Next slide, please. Despite warning labels on the microwave indicating that only qualified service personnel should work on the equipment, the maintenance worker, who was not qualified as an appliance service technician or an electrician, removed the microwave cover and began working on it, unaware of the high voltage dangers that existed. Please know that regulated products such as the microwave here, and it's a regulated product, can hold a significantly large charge for a few minutes even after it is unplugged from the power source. Next slide. While attempting to repair the microwave, the worker plugged it in and turned it on, not realizing that the high voltage circuit and two high voltage wires were disconnected from the microwave magnetron. This component, the magnetron, has a high voltage output. The worker grabbed onto the high voltage wires and was exposed to approximately 3,700 volts of electricity, resulting in a fatality. Next slide. This tragic incident highlights the critical importance of complying with safety regulations and guidelines when working with technical equipment or regulated products and obtaining the necessary permissions under an operating permit. So just as we wouldn't drive a vehicle on the road without the proper fully required auto insurance coverage, license plates on the car, and a valid driver's license driver, we must also ensure that we are appropriately trained and authorized, have the necessary permissions to perform regulated electrical work, for example, as under an electrical operating permit that has an FSR, that is, and that proper supervision and guidance are in place to ensure compliance with all regulated work and technical equipment regulations. It is all our responsibility to prioritize safety in the workplace and take proactive measures to prevent tragic incidents like this from occurring. Let's honor the victim by committing to follow safety regulations and guidelines and ensuring that we have the necessary training, policies, procedures, appropriate electrical operating permits, written permissions, and supervision to work safely with technical equipment and regulated products. In this incident, having an electrical operating permit with an FSR in place to guide the owner and their managers, supervisors, or property managers to do the right things and comply with all regulations would very likely have prevented this tragic incident. Next slide, please. So why is an electrical operating permit important? Well, it's for the well-being of your people. Incidents can cause injuries or even death. Complying and following safety procedures lead to employee confidence, less downtime, happier, healthier workplace. It's good for your business. It gives you a positive reputation. Imagine having an incident and you're on the news or in newspapers, on the television. You know, things just don't look good when your name is plastered out there and there's an incident and something was, you know, legally not done correct according to the act. It also promotes hiring. You're going to get people who want to work at your place because it's safe and they trust you. Also, longevity and reliability of equipment. Your equipment will have a longer lifespan and more reliable, less problems. A lot of times we just take these things for granted, but when you have an operating permit with an FSR that leads you, you're going to do the right things. It reduces risks of shutdowns. I know one example of a complex mall where the owner didn't have an operating permit, didn't have an FSR, they didn't manage their high voltage power transformers and do the right things. They lost the transformer, the main transformer, lost power to the whole complex. The grocery store lost well over $100,000, nearly $200,000 worth of groceries. There was a stockbroker that claimed that they lost about $1 million worth of business. And I mean, just think about the implications of possible civil lawsuits for that. Also the downtime, putting in generators to get temporary power because they just can't replace a generator just like that. So what's good for business also is the reduced legal costs and regulatory issues and other costs that are associated with that. Going to the next column, your legal responsibility. Yes, absolutely. Under this category, it is your legal responsibility to ensure you have an operating permit to perform your maintenance work under and operate your equipment. But also you are entitled to take out installation permits because there's a limitation to what you can do under an operating permit. Also, operating permits, you have access to licensed contractors and certified individuals. It's a system you're buying into. Asset owners have a legal responsibility to have operating permits as per the act and regulations, and there's a directive on that. It gives you access to qualified individuals. Also, new designs and newly built equipment are provided to you for understanding what your system might be improved with. Less problems, more efficiency. That's where you have access to these qualified professionals. Also, it's your legal responsibility to inform Technical Safety BC about any incidents. We investigate a lot of incidents, hundreds and maybe thousands. There's incidents constantly happening, near misses and so on and so forth. This column here is what I'm focusing on mostly here in this talk, in the following slides. The cost of an incident. There's a lot of financial loss when you have an incident. There's legal costs, productivity loss, poor public relations, high internal turnover. There's a lot of stress on owners, managers, supervisors, even property managers, because they have an accountability too. That's the cost of an incident. Next slide, please. So let's talk more about this very important column that I said about cost of an incident. Compliance with safety regulations is not optional. It is mandatory. By having the appropriate operating permit and FSR in place, owners can ensure that they have a system and support framework under the operating permit for meeting all requirements under the Act, and thereby providing a safe working environment for their employees and all others that work on site. It's essential for owners, managers, supervisors, and also property managers to take this responsibility seriously and comply with the regulations to prevent tragedies like this from occurring again. Not complying with safety regulations not only puts individuals' lives at risk, or the risk of having injuries to people or damage to property occur, but also has legal and financial consequences. So let's go back to comparing the analogy I mentioned earlier. So let's change the slide, please. Any owner of a building that has not obtained the required electrical operating permit with an FSR named on the permit, and just to clarify here, operating permits have been required since April 2004, and there's a lot of buildings that don't have it. It is like driving an uninsured vehicle with no license plates on the car and driving without a valid licensed driver since the time of 2004. So just imagine, you're on the road with no insurance, no license plates, no driver license, and driving on the roadways since 2004. What a major potential risk that would be. And very likely the person doing this would not be able to succeed in avoiding some kind of consequences from that approach. In the event of an accident or an incident, the consequences could be catastrophic. Driving without meeting all the requirements for operating a vehicle on the road as per the Motor Vehicle Act poses a high risk and the potential of significant costs. Similarly, failure to comply with electrical operating permit requirements and having an FSR named on that permit to perform all their FSR duties and to guide the owner and ensure compliance as required under the Act and regulations can lead to serious consequences. There have been many hundreds, if not thousands, of incidents that have occurred over the years, and a good portion of those incidents have been investigated. The findings have been basically that any incident that involves technical work and technical equipment systems pretty much always results in some kind of non-compliance of the Act, code, and regulations. In the event of an accident or incident, owners, managers, supervisors, and property managers or property management companies that fail to comply with safety regulations could face legal proceedings and be held entirely responsible for any damages or injuries resulting from the incident, as well as any associated costs. It's essential to understand the consequences of not complying with the regulations and taking proactive measures to prevent such incidents from occurring. By following a structured framework under an electrical operating permit with an FSR to perform all their FSR duties and represent the owner properly as required under the Act, the owners and their teams can ensure that they meet all necessary technical system safety regulation requirements. They can prevent incidents from occurring, and they can avoid the legal and financial consequences that may follow in the event of a tragedy or non-compliance of the Act. Let's prioritize safety and take proactive measures to prevent any such incidents from happening in the future. I guess what I'm trying to say is when people normalize this aspect of deviating from doing what the regulations require is very risky, costly, and may be subject to resultant consequences and severe costs for doing so. Let's ensure we do not put ourselves or others at risk. Please ensure we do comply with technical safety regulations and obtain the required electrical operating permit with an FSR named on a permit as required. Please change the slide. Now this slide here talks about the top causes of incidents. 30% of the time, these incidents occur because of wear out failures. Owners operate equipment well beyond their useful life. And believe me, some of these incidents or failures are significant, cause a lot of damage, fire or shock hazards. 20% are a breakdown in the process. There's the failure to follow established procedures and not having policies as required by the regulations and standards. 15% are ineffective servicing. Owners fail to complete tasks to keep equipment functioning properly and normally. Next slide, please. So here's how you find an FSR. You go to our website and just find a licensed contractor. That's how you find your FSR. Because when you hire a licensed contractor, you're hiring their FSR. And every contractor has, like Neil said, at least one FSR, but they could have many FSRs in a company. But there's at least one FSR that you can hire and name on your operating permit. You can have an employee FSR if they're employed with you, but not an FSR just by themselves. You have to hire a contractor's FSR. And there in the red box is where you click on electrical. That's where you find your FSR under the contractor license. Next slide, please. So here's where you can apply for an operating permit via your online services account. It's at portal.technicalsafetybc.ca, or by filling out our online form. Again, portal.technicalsafetybc.ca, forms FRM 0410. That's where you can apply for an operating permit. And believe me, the owner is the one who, or the property manager is the one who fills out this form, and the FSR assists them, because there's certain things that the FSR has to tell you about what the voltage is, amperage, number of phases, and the kVA. That's what the fee is based on, is the kVA. Next slide, please. So now we're open to questions and answers here.
Good
Hey,
timing,
Richard.
Richard. So they're kind of mounting up. So I'm kind of grouping them together for you. So thanks so much, gentlemen. I think the biggest question that comes to mind for everyone, which is partly why we really generated this, is because operating permits have been required by 2004, since 2004, but there hasn't really been much of a public education or push on them. But, you know, I think because of incidents and because of safety increase, we're seeing much more of a focus on it now. So, you know, bit of a catch up, but would this be something, and this is coming out of one of the questions, would this be something that the consultant we hired to do our depreciation plan should have been looking for when they were doing our report for us?
Shall I take that one, Richard?
Sure.
Actually, one of your viewers captured it nicely when George asked if this includes EV charging, and certainly EV charging and energy management systems is a lot of the reason why there is a focus on operating permits now. Obviously, I think everybody's really familiar with the BC Hydro initiatives out there and EV Ready. And one of the requirements of putting in any kind of energy management system for these chargers will be an operating permit. Now, having said that, these have always been in place for the hospitals, the hotels, the hockey rinks. And we were really focused on the areas of highest hazard in public events. Now, having said that, as a safety officer, when I found these, I dealt with them on a one-by-one basis. So if I went into a strata for some reason and I was like, oh, there's no permit in place, then we'd initiate a discussion with them. But yeah, up until now, it has not been a province-wide initiative. But as we mentioned, with Ray doing it in the Okanagan and Richard in the Lower Mainland and myself on Southern Vancouver Island, it's definitely become a focus, as with all things strata in the last little while. There is this renewed focus, but EV chargers is definitely a big one. There's going to be this drive to add massive loads to some undersized infrastructure.
I'd like to add to that, Tony, if I may. I agree with Neil, what he just said. We're pushing for it, more so now, but we've always pushed for it over the years. The problem is, you know, it's like anything else. It's like ICBC with the Motor Vehicle Act. It exists, nobody reads it, but everybody drives out there, and everybody's supposed to be aware of it, especially when they end up in a court of law, they have to use the Motor Vehicle Act. Same thing with this. When it came into effect, everybody was supposed to know it. Whether everybody knew it or not, they were supposed to. And it's unfortunate that that's the way the world works, because this Safety Standards Act came in 2004. Everybody's supposed to be aware of it. But, you know, it's like life goes on, that we try to do the best we can and we can't know everything, but you're supposed to know it back in 2004.
Well, and we don't really create a safety police force for any of these areas, right? That go out and routinely police the activity of people. It's more responsive and compliant. So that's understandable. But in that nature, so what type of buildings have to comply with an electrical operating permit? Because we have in BC, we have 34,000 strata corporations, but they range from duplexes all the way up to 1,200 units of multiple buildings. So there's got to be some sort of cutoff point, because I can't imagine a duplex where each unit have their own electrical service require an operating permit.
I can answer that, and Neil, you can add to it if you'd like, in case I missed something. There is a directive, and I mentioned it very briefly in our presentation. There's an information bulletin on operating permits. If you go to our website, it's information bulletin, electrical operating permit requirements. But the regulation is the one that's called the directive, electrical operating permit requirements. That's the directive. There's 7 criteria or 7 conditions that you must obtain an operating permit. And actually, Neil covered them off. He showed that page with all those requirements, those 7 conditions. So basically, Neil had mentioned, if you have emergency lights, you have exit signs, emergency equipment, he gave you those 2 pages, which says the equipment, if over 250 kVA, high voltage, fire alarm system. So as soon as you have those things, any one of those conditions, you are required to have an operating permit mandatorily.
I think
So
I can give perhaps a simpler answer is when I do my research of who I am reaching out to contact, and primarily I've been focusing on the self-managed stratas, but also all the property managers. Probably most of the property managers here have heard from me in the last 6 months. I look for elevators, fire alarms, and electrical size. Those are the big ones. And that's going to take care of probably 90% of the buildings. There will be some one-offs that are a little bit more rare, and I'll deal with those after I get to the bulk.
Okay, so in essence, most duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, small bare land stratas don't contain any of those components. So
it would be unusual, you know,
yeah,
obviously on a case-by-case basis, but you're right, it would be unusual.
And I'll add to that, if there is any regulated work in those kind of occupancies, what the owner does is take out an installation permit. There's only 2 types of permits, operating permit and installation permit. So they must have a permit. The point is they would take out a one-time thing as an installation permit to do regulated work on that property.
Right. I think this goes without question, but I think there is confusion in the public that there is a difference between an elevator operating permit and an electrical operating permit.
Yeah, so the elevator permit basically covers from the elevator disconnect to the elevator, and that is done by elevator technicians. The electrical operating permit is covering obviously everything in the building, but also from the main distribution to that elevator disconnect. And of course, more importantly, the fire alarm interconnection that controls that elevator.
You guys referred to the management system or the energy management system for EV charging, but what if we're in a building or again, townhouse complex, for example, where none of the triggers jump off, but there's a single charging station in a garage? Is that going to require an operating permit?
No, because it's going to be sized according to the individual metered units ability. Like I think of the typical townhouse, you know, they've got the meter on the side or it's in a closet on the end of the building. Usually where we run into that is BC Hydro's ability to supply that extra power. But yeah, it's only energy management system. You know, if you've got a 1200 amp service in your building and you're already at 1100 amps, you know, there's only room for 3 chargers. So that energy management system comes in when you want to have 16 chargers, and somebody's going to have to administer that system to make sure we're not overloading the electrical system. So that's the key there.
Exactly. So one of the provisions, and I think that the property managers and strata councils and everyone who's paying attention to this should be aware, is that Technical Safety BC is an authority in British Columbia, and we have a direct link to our legislation under the Strata Property Act. If an order is issued by TSBC, you have to comply with the order. You don't have a choice. And so whether it's the requirement for a permit, whether it's a requirement for safety upgrades, alterations, whatever it may be. But let's just talk that through. So let's say TSBC issues an order for something specific. What's the sequence of what could potentially happen?
I can try and answer that. So the first thing we do is not necessarily issue an order. Actually, what we do is if we go to a site and inspect something, we are issuing a certificate of inspection for what our findings are. So basically, it's in a nice way saying, hey, look, here's what we found is non-compliant. Here's what you know, you got to fix up these things by a certain date. And then if you don't fix it by a certain date, well, we may have some follow-up, but after a while, if you don't comply with what we found was non-compliant, that's when an order could come about. When there's nobody doing something about it, that's when an order, it's called a compliance order. And that's generally after. So we don't order people from first. We're just commenting on what we saw was non-compliant. So in essence, if something goes further wrong, you've been notified. And if something happens, consequence from that, there's liability and risk for letting it stay like that. So maybe what you might want to do is tell your FSR, come in here to assess what needs to be done. Maybe disconnect that circuit or that feeder or whatever from the source. And now it's made safe. And now it may take you a while. It could take you quite some time to fix something up. But yeah, the order comes later on. But originally, we notify you with a certificate of inspection.
I've always believed strongly that if I have to write an order, it's a failure on my part to communicate. I see myself as an educational person and an advocate, and I'm going to try to help any strata to make sure their building's compliant. Yeah, if we get to the point of an order, that's a failure on my part for sure.
No, that's very noble of you, but it's not. There are communities out there who just don't comply and have no intention of complying. They're rare, but they are certainly out there. So
fair enough. Fair enough.
And they need to realize that they assume an enormous amount of liability from the perspective of public risk and safety, but not only that, possibility of cancellation of their insurance as well. So, you know, it becomes a much deeper problem for their communities when they're not complying. So take that to another level with emergency generators. Can you answer an operational question about emergency generators? They are electrical generating equipment, so
yeah, very, very similar. Like I know I have a lot of colleagues that I work with in industry, and I did a lot of industrial work myself. And yeah, it typically is someone from Cummins or something that's coming to deal with your generator. But very similar to the elevator, that's a specialized technician who's dealing with just the generator itself. All the electrical that's from that generator and how it interacts with your main electrical system is going to be the purview of that field safety representative for the electrical contractor.
One of the challenges I think that may exist is volunteers within the strata or on-site maintenance person are the people who were hopefully routinely doing the testing. We don't know what standards of the testing there are. Does TSBC offer a certification course for testing for operational for generators?
No.
Does anybody offer it?
No, actually all training goes through ITA, which is Industry Training Authority. And we have certification and licensing, but and we have testing to get those FSR certifications. But ultimately, the training and who deals with this is the FSR named in the operating permit. They're the ones who determine worker qualification matters. And I want to clarify something here. So for that incident that I described, there has to be a permission. There's a regulation that says about there has to be a permission. In other words, the owner gets to say who they want to hire. But the problem is they're not allowed to use them. They're not authorized to use them unless they go through the FSR first to determine worker qualification matters. And there's a sign off. And then and only then, once the FSR says, yes, they're qualified to do what you want them to do, then the owner can authorize them. But otherwise, no, they can't authorize them.
Right. So that's problematic because, you know, we see all kinds of variations of testing or lack of testing. And then the other problem we see is routine maintenance and operations with fuel polishing and filtering and distribution of diesel systems, et cetera. It's a bit of a complicated mess, actually, to be perfectly honest, in our industry.
Yes, it's challenging. Like I said earlier, before we started this presentation to you, Tony, it's complicated. It really is. And it's not that we try to make it complex or complicated. It's just the nature of the business. But these things came about because of incidents, the wrong things that were done wrong, you know, and these rules came up about because of those situations. And that's why it's written the way it is. And I'll tell you right now, I really believe in it, that it works really well. I think it does. I believe in it. I'm passionate about it. But remember, documentation, permits, permissions, those things all matter.
And just add one word to that for our industry, and it's called record keeping. And it's a critical obligation of these communities that struggle at the best of times with record keeping.
Well, when you have an operating permit, you are required, there's a regulation that says you must keep a log of all work, the who, what, where, when, why. Actually, if you read under the powers of a safety officer, the safety officer can ask for all those records. And if you don't have it documented, we have a saying here, if it's not documented, it didn't happen.
I can tell you from my own building, I agree 100%. Go looking for a record that doesn't exist, you can be pretty sure it didn't happen. So how can a building owner find out if they're compliant, if they've been through an inspection process?
You want to answer this, Neil?
Actually, no, you go ahead. I was going to say, I'm just reading some of the great questions here, and I thought I can tell a little story that might encompass a bunch of them.
Okay, I'll just answer very quickly. So one thing is, that's where your FSR comes about. The FSR works with the property management company, with the owner, with the managers, supervisors, and they guide you to understand it. So you want to get a good FSR that knows what the act and regulations and the code standards. I mean, just to give you a quick example, you know, everybody assumes that there's people digging the earth everywhere. I had an incident investigation where someone was digging the earth and hit a high voltage cable. Did you know that you cannot dig in the earth unless you know there's no buried electrical equipment? If the guy struck the cable and caused damage to the machine, caused a near injury or loss of life to the worker, and there was no permission, the FSR didn't know about it, and that's where all of a sudden there's liability on the owner because they didn't get the FSR involved to get guidance.
Agreed. Neil, you have a great story.
I just wanted to describe two phone calls that I had this morning that I think kind of encompass this quite nicely. I got a call from a new Stratum president in Sydney, and he was in a little bit of a panic because, of course, he gets a regulatory notice from us saying that this is a requirement. So he gave me a call, and I was able to give him a call back. And, you know, I did a quick search, found out that, yes, there is no permit in place. But we did notice a lot of the things about his building. There'd been a regular electrician that had been in there regularly. They'd always been pulling permits. You could see that all the different owners had been compliant and asked for their regular inspections, what have you. So, you know, I was able to just ask him, you know, are you guys comfortable working with this electrician? And he said, yeah, that's our intent, is to reach out to him. And it just happened to be a fellow that I know quite well and I deal with quite regularly. So I said, great. And we walked him through it. And I was able to explain to this new Strata president that he already has an account with us, which is for his elevator permit. So we walked him through a little bit how he gets online and how he's going to apply for it. And then he's going to reach out to that electrician. So when we hung up, I called the electrician and said, hey, this gentleman, you know, is going to be reaching out to you. He said, oh yeah, he already did. And he said, great, what do I need to know? So the electrician and I talked for a few minutes, and boom, they're off to the races. And that's about my best case scenario when I deal with these. The next phone call I had was from a self-managed strata that was, as Antonio alluded to, they were a little resistant. They don't have a relationship with qualified contractor. They'd been using an on-site manager who'd been doing all this work. So that's when, you know, my head hits my hand and then I have to explain that, you know, wow, like not only are you as a strata responsible for that guy as an employee doing this work that he's not qualified to do, but, you know, you've just opened yourself up. So, you know, again, I see our role as an advocate and an educator. It was not a, you know, we're the big bad regulator with the hammer coming to get you. But I think he came a long way in that 20-minute conversation. And I'll be talking to him again. But yeah, he needs to go out now and establish that relationship with a qualified person to be able to move forward. So yeah, one of the big questions I see here in the chat is, you know, how do we know? We'll always reach out to technical safety and we'll be able to see that. If you've received a letter from myself or Ray or Richard, then you know that we've already done a search in the system and found that there isn't a permit there. And that's why we're reaching out, is to initiate the conversation.
Thanks for that, because that certainly has been our experience with members, is that Technical Safety BC has been an advocate for property owners and public safety, and doesn't come off as a regulator. So that's really a superb perspective. I was going to say most of the other questions are just kind of captured over what we chatted, and
Could I share one
you-
more story?
Sure.
Yeah, this is a very, it's so innocent how things happen. So this owner hired someone because he heard he had to do infrared testing, which is heat tracing of your equipment, see if there's hot spots. Very simple, like you're not touching anything, but they hired this person who's not a licensed contractor, was not an electrician, was not an FSR. And apparently, I'm not going to get into the specifics of it because I'm trying to protect the innocent here, took it upon himself to take the cover off, and it was high voltage, and he lost his life. And the thing was, the owner didn't have an operating permit, didn't have an FSR to rely on to guide them to say, no, this person cannot do that. Removing a cover, that's regulated work. He's not qualified. Like, he doesn't know what he's doing. If he was supervising by the FSR could have maybe done some things that they could have worked together. But an innocent thing like sending someone to electrical room to take infrared testing, you don't know what can happen. And all of a sudden you have a financial consequence and loss of life.
Well, and that's the real tragedy, right? That and the fact that you may have a building that goes through, when it's serious enough, a shutdown, and homeowners have to evacuate a building. And that certainly has happened as well, until the matters are remedied. And so it becomes a huge housing problem for people as well. So thank you to you both very much for your time, for your presentation. Sween, thanks so much. And for the support that you guys have provided. That's been really great. There will be a follow-up package going out to everybody with links and with the presentation and information. And we encourage everyone to reach out to Technical Safety BC if you have questions, but start with the website, because there are just great resources on the website. Beyond that, stay compliant and stay safe. I would say it would be the best parting message. Final words, Richard, Neil?
Thank you for allowing me to be part of this. I'm very honored, and I thank you very much, everybody at this session. Thank you so much.
Agreed. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully we'll be talking to you all soon.
We'll arrange for it for sure. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.